John Carter stood in front of the Grand Valeri Imperial Court, his sharp eyes scanning the room. The palace was like something out of a dream. Tall golden pillars stretched to the sky, and the floor beneath him shimmered like liquid silver. Around him, alien nobles whispered in hushed tones, their glowing blue eyes filled with doubt and disbelief. He knew why. John was the only human in the room. At the center of the grand hall sat Emperor Valath, ruler of the Valeri Empire, a species known for their elegance, intelligence, and powerful telepathic abilities. His twin daughters, Princess Soraya and Princess Kellis, stood beside him, their faces unreadable. A high-ranking noble stepped forward, his long robes trailing behind him. His name was Lord Xelos, and from the way he looked at John, it was clear he did not approve of the Emperor's decision. "Your Majesty," Xelos said, his voice calm but sharp. "With all due respect, why must we place the lives of your daughters in the hands of a human?" John smirked but said nothing. He was used to this. Humans were new to the galactic stage, and though they had proven themselves in battle, many still saw them as unpredictable and reckless. The Emperor raised a hand, silencing the whispers. His deep voice echoed through the chamber. "Because, Lord Xelos, a human is exactly what we need." Murmurs spread through the court. The Emperor continued, his golden eyes fixed on John. "2 nights ago, an assassin entered my daughter's chambers. He moved without a sound, bypassed all security, and would have succeeded if not for the human." The room turned to John. He met their stares with quiet confidence. "I was just in the right place at the right time," John said with a shrug. "In the right place," the Emperor repeated, "and the only one who acted. While our guards were too slow to react, you stopped the assassin with nothing but your instincts and a broken chair." John allowed himself a small grin. It had been a chaotic night. He had only been a guest in the palace, observing the Valeri way of life. But when he heard the muffled sound of a struggle down the hall, he didn't hesitate. He had rushed in, found the assassin with a blade to Princess Soraya's throat, and acted without thinking. One broken chair and a few bruised ribs later, the assassin lay unconscious, and John stood between the princesses and danger. "I will not risk my daughter's lives again," the Emperor declared. "From this moment on, John Carter is their personal protector." The court erupted in protest. Many Valeri warriors had trained their whole lives to serve as royal guardians. Now, an outsider had taken that honor. Princess Kellis, the younger of the twins, took a step forward. She was fierce, with sharp, calculating eyes. Unlike her sister, who remained composed, Kellis looked John up and down, as if trying to find a flaw. "You do not look like a warrior," she said finally. "You wear no armor. You carry no weapons." John chuckled. "Neither did your assassin, and I still won." Kellis narrowed her eyes, but Soraya placed a hand on her sister's shoulder. The older twin was more reserved, her movements graceful and controlled. She studied John carefully, then turned to their father. "If this is your decision, father," Soraya said, "then we will obey." The Emperor nodded, then turned to John. "Your duty begins immediately. From this moment on, you will live and breathe for their safety. You will accompany them everywhere. You will sleep near their chambers, eat when they eat, and fight when they are in danger. You are no longer just a soldier. You are their shadow." John gave a small nod. "Understood." Lord Xelos stepped forward again, frustration on his face. "Your Majesty, at least let us test him. A simple human cannot match a trained Valeri warrior." The Emperor's lips curled into a knowing smile. "Very well. A test, then." John sighed. He had been expecting this. Within minutes, the court had moved to the training grounds, an open-air arena surrounded by glowing force fields. A tall Valeri warrior, clad in battle armor, stepped forward. His name was Commander Vyric, and he was known as one of the deadliest fighters in the Empire. "This is foolish," Kellis muttered. Soraya, however, remained quiet, watching John carefully. A guard tossed John a simple combat staff, a long metallic rod used for training. The Velari warrior twirled his own, moving with perfect precision. John rolled his shoulders and gripped his staff. "All right, let's see what you've got." The match began. Virik moved fast, almost too fast. His strikes were precise, his footwork flawless. John barely had time to block, his arms shaking from the impact. The court laughed. "A human cannot match our speed," one noble said. But John wasn't trying to match speed. He was watching, waiting. Then he saw it, a pattern in Virik's attacks. A small hesitation before each strike. A weakness. John suddenly switched tactics, dodging instead of blocking. He let Virik's own momentum work against him, stepping aside at the last second. The warrior stumbled, just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. John struck hard, sweeping Virik's legs from under him. The mighty Velari commander crashed to the ground. Silence filled the arena. John exhaled, resting his staff on his shoulder. "Not bad," he said, "but humans fight a little differently." The emperor laughed, a deep, proud sound. "You see now why I chose him." Kellis and Soraya exchanged glances. For the first time, they wondered if their human protector might actually be worthy after all. John Carter followed the twin princesses through the Velari royal palace, his sharp eyes scanning everything. It had only been a few hours since Emperor Valath had declared him their official protector, but he already felt the weight of his new role. The halls were grand, filled with shimmering lights and floating crystal decorations. Elegant Velari nobles passed by, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright disapproval. A human, protecting the royal family. It was unheard of. Princess Soraya, the older twin, walked with grace, her silver robes flowing behind her. She moved like a queen already, calm, composed, always in control. Kellis, the younger twin, was different. She walked with her arms crossed, eyes sharp, like she was ready for a fight at any moment. John sighed inwardly. This was not going to be easy. They entered a large training chamber, its walls lined with glowing energy shields. The room was empty except for a few royal guards watching from the sides. A large circular arena sat in the center, its floor made of polished metal. Kellis turned to John, a smirk on her face. "You won against Commander Virik," she said, cracking her knuckles. "But I'm not convinced." John raised an eyebrow. "Oh, and what would convince you?" Kellis stepped into the arena. "Fight me." The guard stiffened. Even Soraya looked slightly surprised. "Kellis, this is unnecessary," she said. "Is it?" Kellis shot back. "He's supposed to protect us. If he can't handle me, how can he handle an assassin?" John exhaled. He didn't want to fight a princess, but he also knew that refusing would mean losing their respect. "All right," he said, stepping forward. "No weapons, just hand to hand." Kellis grinned. "Of course, unless you're scared." John chuckled. "Scared of a princess? Never." The two circled each other. Kellis was fast, faster than most humans John had fought. She lunged first, aiming for his ribs with a sharp punch. John dodged, barely. She followed up with a spinning kick. This time, John blocked, but the impact sent a sharp pain through his forearm. She was stronger than she looked. Kellis smirked. "Not bad, but you're holding back." John rolled his shoulders. "I don't want to hurt a princess." Kellis narrowed her eyes. "That's your mistake." She moved in again, this time even faster. A flurry of strikes came at him. John blocked, ducked, sidestepped. She was good, but she was also predictable. She relied too much on speed, not enough on endurance. John suddenly shifted forward, grabbing her wrist and twisting. Kellis gasped as she lost balance. In one smooth motion, John swept her legs and flipped her onto her back. The room fell silent. John stepped back and offered his hand. "You fight well," he said, "but you burn energy too fast. In a real battle, that's dangerous." Kalis stared at him, then finally took his hand. Instead of looking angry, she looked impressed. Soraya smiled slightly. "It seems our father made the right choice after all." One of the guards cleared his throat. "Your Highnesses, the Royal Council has requested your presence." Soraya nodded. "We'll be there shortly." John watched as the guards led them away. He had passed the first test, but something told him the real challenges were only beginning. A hidden threat. Later that evening, John stood outside the royal chambers, his back against the wall. The twin princesses were inside, discussing politics, but John wasn't interested in that. His job was to keep them safe. His instincts were already screaming at him. Something wasn't right. He scanned the hallway. The guards stood at their posts, but John noticed something strange. One of them had shifted his stance. A normal person wouldn't notice, but John was trained to see the smallest details. The guard's hand was too close to his weapon, too tense, too ready. John didn't hesitate. He moved. In a blur, the guard suddenly lunged for the door, reaching for the control panel to override the lock. John was faster. He slammed into the attacker, tackling him to the ground. The fake guard snarled and tried to pull a blade from his belt, but John grabbed his wrist and twisted. A sickening crack followed. The assassin screamed. Real guards rushed forward, weapons drawn. Soraya and Kalis burst from their room, eyes wide. "What happened?" Soraya demanded. John stood, breathing hard. He grabbed the assassin's collar and yanked him up. "He was about to break into your room." Kalis's eyes darkened. Another assassin. Inside the palace. John looked at the guards. "Check every post. There could be more." The captain of the guards nodded, immediately barking orders. The palace went into high alert. Soraya stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "How did you know?" John met her gaze. "I pay attention." Kalis crossed her arms. "And you acted before anyone else." John sighed. "That's my job, isn't it?" Soraya exchanged a glance with her sister. This time, there was no doubt in their eyes. John wasn't just their bodyguard anymore. He was the only one they could truly trust. John Carter stood with his back against the cold metallic wall, arms crossed, eyes scanning the corridor. His mind replayed the events of the night before. The assassin disguised as a guard, the quick fight, the desperate attempt to break into the princess's chambers. Something was wrong, very wrong. The palace was supposed to be the safest place in the Valeri Empire, yet 2 assassination attempts had already happened, and both had failed because of him. Now someone in the royal court wanted the princesses dead, and John intended to find out who. A quiet warning. In the morning, John followed Princess Soraya and Princess Kalis to the council hall, a massive chamber where the most powerful nobles gathered to discuss politics. The council members were already seated, their long robes flowing around them as they whispered amongst themselves. John noticed how some of them glanced at him. Not all of them were happy with a human standing next to the heirs of the empire. Soraya sat at the central table, her posture straight and regal. Kalis, as usual, looked restless, tapping her fingers on the smooth surface. The discussion began, talks of trade, diplomacy, and the rising tensions with the neighboring Zarvith dominion. But John wasn't listening to the politics. He was watching the faces in the room. Then something caught his attention. A noble named Lord Salos leaned toward another council member and whispered something. The moment John looked his way, Salos immediately turned his head. John narrowed his eyes, suspicious. As the meeting ended, the nobles slowly left. But as John followed the princesses out, a voice stopped him. Human. John turned. Lord Salos stood behind him. The noble's blue eyes were cold, his expression unreadable. "You do not belong here." John smirked. "Funny. I heard the emperor thinks otherwise." Salos didn't react. "I will give you a warning," he said. "This empire is built on tradition. Humans do not understand our ways. If you continue to interfere, you may not live long enough to regret it." John's smile faded. He stepped closer, his voice low. "Is that a threat?" Salos met his gaze. "It is a fact." Then he turned and walked away, his robes flowing behind him. John clenched his jaw. The game had begun. Secrets in the dark. Later that night, John sat in his small quarters near the princess's chambers, deep in thought. Salos was hiding something. He was too confident, too calm, like a man who already knew the outcome of a battle before it began. John exhaled. He needed more information. A soft knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. When he opened it, he was surprised to see Princess Callis standing there, arms crossed. "We need to talk," she said. John stepped aside, and she walked in. Callis didn't waste time. "You think someone on the council is involved in the assassination attempts, don't you?" John nodded. "Yes, and I think Lord Salos knows more than he's saying." Callis sat on the edge of his desk. "Soraya believes in diplomacy. She wants to wait, gather evidence, and present it to the Emperor." She shook her head. "But I'm not like her. I want to act now." John studied her. Unlike her sister, Callis was more impulsive, more willing to take risks. It made her a strong fighter, but also put her in danger. "Then let's act smart," John said. "Rushing in without proof will only make us enemies. But if we find something concrete," he smiled, "then we can crush whoever is behind this." Callis smirked. "I like the way you think." She stood up. "I have access to the palace archives. If Salos is involved in something illegal, there might be records." John nodded. "Then let's start there." The archives. Deep inside the palace, past the main halls, was a hidden chamber, the Royal Archives. It contained records of every political move, every trade deal, every military action ever taken by the Empire. John followed Callis as she unlocked the security doors with her royal access. The massive room was filled with glowing data terminals and ancient scrolls stored in protective cases. Callis moved to one of the terminals and began searching. "Salos has been on the council for years. If he's hiding something, we'll find it." John watched the doors, his instincts on high alert. If anyone caught them here, it wouldn't end well. Minutes passed. Then, "Got something," Callis whispered. John moved to her side. On the screen was a list of secret transactions, funds being sent to an unknown source outside the Empire. And the sender, Lord Salos. "Looks like he's paying someone off," John muttered. Callis frowned. "But who?" Before John could answer, a soft click echoed behind them. The doors had locked. Then the lights flickered. John's stomach tightened. "A trap. We need to move," he said. "Now." Callis shut down the terminal and turned, just as a group of armed figures stepped through a hidden side entrance. John immediately pulled Callis behind him, his hands clenching into fists. The leader of the attackers stepped forward, his face covered by a dark mask. "You should not have come here, human." John smirked. "Yeah, well, I tend to go where I'm not wanted." The masked figure raised his weapon. "Kill them." John's body tensed. This was about to get messy. John Carter's muscles tensed as he stood in front of Princess Callis, shielding her from the masked attackers. The Royal Archives were supposed to be one of the most secure places in the palace, yet they had walked into a trap. The leader of the attackers stepped forward, his blaster aimed directly at John. "You should not have come here, human." John smirked. "Yeah. And you shouldn't have let me find out your boss is a traitor." The masked man's fingers twitched on the trigger. John moved first. With lightning speed, he grabbed the nearest data console and yanked it forward, using it as a temporary shield. Blaster fire erupted. The energy bolt slammed into the console, sending sparks flying. "Callis, move," John shouted. The princess didn't hesitate. She darted behind a row of tall storage shelves as John grabbed a fallen chair and hurled it at one of the attackers. The impact knocked the enemy off balance, giving John a split second to strike. He lunged forward, grabbing the masked leader's wrist and twisting. The blaster dropped to the floor with a sharp clang. Before the attacker could react, John drove his elbow into the man's stomach, then delivered a swift kick to the chest. The leader crashed into the shelves, sending scrolls and data pads tumbling. But there were still 3 more attackers. One of them raised a weapon. Kayla struck first. She grabbed a metal rod from a nearby shelf and swung it with force, knocking the weapon from the enemy's hands. Before he could recover, she kicked his legs out from under him. John couldn't help but grin. She learned fast. 2 attackers remained, and they weren't hesitating anymore. They aimed their blasters at John and fired. John dived behind a terminal, rolling to avoid the shots. His mind raced. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped inside a locked room. Unless... John's eyes flicked toward the ceiling. The air vents. He glanced at Kayla and pointed upward. She understood immediately. "Cover me," she whispered. John nodded. Then, without warning, he charged at the remaining attackers. They fired, but too late. John was already too close. He grabbed one by the wrist, spun him around, and used him as a human shield against the incoming blaster fire. The second attacker hesitated, and that was all John needed. He stepped forward and delivered a knockout punch straight to the man's jaw. Kayla, meanwhile, had climbed onto a shelf and pried open the air vent cover. "John, hurry," she called. John leaped, grabbing the edge of the shelf and pulling himself up just as the leader of the attackers recovered. More guards would arrive soon, but John had no intention of sticking around. He climbed into the vent right after Kayla. The narrow metal tunnel was dark and cramped, but it was their only way out. The sounds of shouts and footsteps echoed behind them. John exhaled. Well, that was fun. Kayla shot him an amused look. "You have a strange idea of fun, human." John grinned. "You're starting to sound like your sister." Kayla rolled her eyes and crawled forward. "Come on. We need to get to Soraya before the council realizes we're onto them." A dangerous truth. After crawling through the vents for what felt like forever, John and Kayla finally emerged inside an empty corridor near the princess's chambers. John helped Kayla down, then checked for guards. The hallway was clear. Kayla pressed a hand against the wall, activating a hidden communicator. "Soraya, are you there?" A moment later, Soraya's voice crackled through. "Kayla, what's wrong?" "We were attacked in the archives," Kayla said. "Salos is behind the assassination attempts. We found records of secret transactions. He's paying someone outside the Empire." Silence. Then Soraya's voice, tense. "Meet me in my chambers. Quickly." John nodded. "Let's move." The betrayal. Minutes later, John and Kayla slipped into Soraya's private chamber. The elder princess was pacing the room, worry etched across her face. "You're sure about this?" she asked. Kayla nodded. "There's no doubt. Salos is working against us." Soraya exhaled. "Then we must take this to father." "He will." She stopped. John frowned. "What is it?" Soraya's eyes darkened. "The Emperor is meeting with the council right now. Salos will expect us to accuse him. If he truly has power within the palace, he may have already planted false evidence against us." John clenched his fists. "You think he'll try to turn the Emperor against you?" Soraya nodded. "We cannot go in unprepared." Kayla crossed her arms. "Then what do we do?" Soraya's gaze was sharp. "We gather proof that cannot be denied. If Salos is working with outsiders, we need to know who they are. We need to catch him in the act." John smirked. "I like where this is going." Kayla grinned. "For once, we agree." Soraya turned to John. "Salos will make his next move soon. He doesn't know we escaped, so we still have the element of surprise." John's eyes gleamed. Then let's use it. John Carter stood near the window of Soraya's private chambers, his sharp eyes scanning the palace courtyard below. The night was quiet, too quiet. A storm was coming. Not a storm of nature, but one of politics, betrayal, and danger. Behind him, Princess Soraya and Princess Kalis discussed their next move. They had uncovered the truth. Lord Salos was behind the assassination attempts, secretly funding an unknown force outside the Empire. But the real challenge was proving it before Xylos could turn the Emperor against them. Soraya paced the room, deep in thought. If we go to Father now, Salos will deny everything. He has power in the council, and without solid proof, we risk looking like traitors ourselves. Kalis leaned against the table, frustrated. So we wait while he plots against us. John turned from the window. No, we trap him. Soraya and Kalis looked at him. John continued. Salos is working with someone outside the Empire, right? That means he has to send and receive messages. He pointed to Soraya. You said the palace has a secure communication system, but you also have records of his transactions. Soraya's eyes widened. You think he's been using a secret channel? John nodded. Exactly. If we can find who he's talking to, we can expose him. Kalis grinned. Now that's a plan I can support. Soraya hesitated. Breaking into private communication logs is dangerous. John smirked. So is getting killed. Soraya sighed. Fine. But we must be careful. Infiltrating the communication hub. The communication hub was located deep inside the palace, guarded by royal sentinels. It was a high-security area, where only the Emperor and his most trusted officials had access. John, Kalis, and Soraya moved carefully through the corridors, avoiding patrols. Soraya led the way, her royal authority allowing them to bypass some guards without suspicion. At last, they reached the entrance to the secure data room. A single guard stood watch. Kalis grinned. Leave this to me. Before Soraya could stop her, Kalis walked straight up to the guard, hands on her hips. You're dismissed. The guard frowned. By whose orders? Kalis narrowed her eyes. Are you questioning a princess of the Empire? The guard hesitated. Then he bowed slightly and stepped aside. My apologies, Your Highness. John chuckled as Kalis walked past. I like your style. Inside the room, glowing screens filled the walls, displaying encrypted messages and official transmissions. Soraya moved to the control panel and began searching the system. Salos must have used an unauthorized channel, she muttered. If I can bypass security logs. Minutes passed. John stood near the door, keeping watch. Kalis tapped her fingers impatiently. Then Soraya gasped. Got it. John and Kalis rushed to her side. On the screen was a list of secret transmissions. The sender, Lord Salos. The receiver, unknown contact, Zarveth Dominion. John frowned. The Zarveth Dominion. The Empire's enemies. Soraya nodded, her face pale. This is treason. Kalis clenched her fists. We have proof now. Let's take this to Father. Before she could finish, the alarms blared. They had been discovered. The escape. The doors slammed open, and armed guards stormed in. Step away from the console. One of them ordered, weapons raised. John reacted instantly. He grabbed the nearest data pad, loaded the proof onto it, and slid it into his jacket. Kalis flipped the table, knocking over two guards. Soraya pressed a button on her wrist device, shutting down the room's lights for a moment of confusion. John used the distraction to dive forward, knocking a guard's weapon aside and delivering a hard punch to his jaw. Kalis spun, delivering a swift kick to another guard's knee, sending him crashing to the floor. Soraya wasn't a fighter, but she grabbed a fallen blaster and aimed it at the remaining guards. Don't move. The guards hesitated. That was all John needed. Move, he shouted, grabbing Soraya's arm and pulling her toward the door. They ran through the corridors, alarms echoing behind them. We need to get to the Emperor, Kalis panted. John knew that was easier said than done. Salos had likely sealed off access to the throne room by now. As they turned a corner, a group of elite royal guards blocked their path. John skidded to a stop. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were loyal to Xelos. A tall figure stepped forward. Xelos himself. His cold blue eyes locked onto them. He smiled, a predator's smile. "You've been busy," Xelos said, his voice smooth. "But I'm afraid this game ends here." Soraya held her ground. "You betrayed the Empire." Xelos sighed. "You misunderstand, Princess. The Empire needs strong leadership. Your father is old, weak. His time is over." Kalis growled. "And you think betraying us will make you stronger?" Xelos chuckled. "Oh, I don't think. I know." He snapped his fingers. The royal guards raised their weapons. John whispered, "Any ideas?" Kalis whispered back, "Yeah, fight." John grinned. "I was hoping you'd say that." John Carter tightened his fists as Lord Xelos stood before them, his personal royal guards blocking the corridor. The dim palace lights cast long shadows on the walls, making the moment feel even more intense. Princess Soraya and Kalis stood beside him, their eyes burning with defiance. They had risked everything to expose Xelos' betrayal, and now they were trapped with no easy escape. Xelos smirked. "Surrender now, and I might spare your lives." John scoffed. "Yeah, and what happens after that? You frame the princesses as traitors. You take control of the Empire." Xelos chuckled. "Smart human, but knowing the truth won't save you." He snapped his fingers. The guards moved forward, weapons raised. John acted first. He grabbed a fallen blaster from the ground and fired at the lights above. The hallway was instantly thrown into darkness. "Move," John shouted. Kalis darted forward, sweeping a guard's legs out from under him. Soraya pressed against the wall, staying close to John as he drove his fist into another soldier's gut. Xelos' voice echoed through the hallway. "You think a little darkness will stop me?" The corridor flashed red as emergency lights flickered on. John cursed. So much for that plan. More guards charged toward them. John and Kalis fought back with everything they had. Kalis twisted and dodged, striking at weak spots in the enemy's armor. John fought with brutal efficiency, knocking weapons away, using the walls for leverage, keeping the enemies off balance. But they were outnumbered. Soraya raised her hands. "Stop." John's heart pounded. Was she surrendering? Xelos smiled. "A wise decision, Princess." Then Soraya pressed a hidden switch on her wrist communicator. A shockwave pulse erupted through the corridor. Xelos' guards staggered, weapons short-circuiting. John grinned. "Now that's what I call a plan." Kalis grabbed Soraya's arm. "Come on, before they recover." The throne room confrontation. John, Kalis, and Soraya ran through the palace corridors. They needed to reach the throne room. They had proof that Xelos was a traitor. If they could present it to the Emperor, everything would change. But as they neared the grand doors of the imperial throne room, Xelos was already there. The massive doors swung open, revealing the Emperor sitting on his golden throne. The council stood beside him, their faces unreadable. Xelos strode forward, his face calm. "Your Majesty, I bring terrible news. Your daughters, they have turned against you." John clenched his fists. "The liar." Soraya stepped forward. "Father, don't listen to him. He's the traitor. We have proof." Xelos interrupted smoothly. They broke into the royal archives, stole information, and attacked the guards. They even brought an outsider into the palace. He gestured toward John. The Emperor's eyes darkened. "Is this true?" Kalis spoke firmly. "We took nothing but the truth, Father. Xelos has been secretly communicating with the Zarvith Dominion. He is planning to betray you." Xelos laughed. "And where is your proof, dear princess?" John pulled out the stolen datapad. Soraya pressed a button, and the room's holographic screen displayed the evidence. Secret transmissions between Xelos and the Zarvith Dominion, detailing their plans to overthrow the Emperor. Gasps filled the room. The council members whispered among themselves. The Emperor's face turned stone cold. Xelos' confidence vanished. This is false, he stammered. A trick. John stepped forward. Oh, it's real. And you know it. The Emperor rose from his throne. Xelos, you have betrayed my empire. Guards, seize him. The royal guards, once loyal to Xelos, now turned against him. Xelos growled in rage. You think this is over? He activated a hidden device on his wrist. An explosion shook the palace. Smoke filled the room as Zarvith soldiers burst through the shattered windows, weapons ready. Xelos laughed darkly. The Empire belongs to me now. John pulled out his blaster. Not if I have anything to say about it. The battle had begun. The palace shook as explosions ripped through its ancient walls. Smoke filled the air, and the sound of blaster fire echoed through the throne room. Zarvith soldiers had stormed in, weapons raised, their eyes burning with a hunger for conquest. John Carter stood his ground, gripping his blaster. Beside him, Princess Soraya and Princess Callis prepared to fight. The Emperor's guards tried to hold back the invaders, but Xelos' betrayal had left the palace vulnerable. Lord Xelos stood in the chaos, his face twisted with victory. You were too late, he sneered. The Empire falls tonight. John aimed his blaster. We'll see about that. He fired. Xelos dodged, rolling behind the Emperor's throne. He activated his wrist device, calling more soldiers into the room. John turned to Soraya and Callis. We need to get your father out of here. If he's captured, the Empire is lost. Soraya nodded. There's a secret exit behind the throne. Callis pulled out her twin daggers. I'll hold them off. Go. John hesitated. Callis. She grinned. You think I can't handle a fight? John smirked. Fine. Just don't die. Callis leaped into battle, her daggers flashing as she took down 2 soldiers in seconds. John grabbed Soraya's hand and ran toward the hidden passage behind the throne. The Emperor followed, his face grim but determined. The escape. John led Soraya and the Emperor through a dark tunnel beneath the palace. Dust filled the air, and the ground shook with every explosion above. Soraya glanced back. Callis, she's alone up there. John kept moving. She's strong. She'll be fine. The tunnel led to a small docking bay, where a single royal shuttle waited. John quickly accessed the controls. We need to take off now. But before they could board, a shadow moved behind them. Xelos. He stood in the doorway, a blaster in one hand, a smug grin on his face. Leaving so soon, he mocked. Soraya stepped in front of her father. You've lost, Xelos. The Emperor is safe. Xelos laughed. You think this is over? He raised his blaster. John moved fast. He grabbed a nearby metal pipe and swung it, knocking Xelos' weapon aside. The blaster clattered to the floor. Xelos lunged at John, throwing a punch. John dodged, countering with a hard hit to Xelos' ribs. The traitor stumbled, but he wasn't weak. He recovered quickly and tackled John to the ground. They rolled across the floor, fighting for control. Xelos was strong, but John had something more: determination. With a final effort, John flipped Xelos over and pinned him down. Xelos growled. You think you're a hero? John punched him. No, just a guy who doesn't like traitors. Xelos fell unconscious. John stood up, breathing hard. That's one problem solved. Soraya helped her father onto the shuttle. We need to go. Now. John ran to the controls and powered up the engines. The ship lifted off, escaping into the night sky. The final stand. Back in the throne room, Callis was outnumbered. Zarvith soldiers surrounded her, their weapons aimed. Xelos' second-in-command, a Zarvith general, stepped forward. Surrender, princess. The Empire is ours. Kalis wiped blood from her lip and grinned. Not yet. She pressed a button on her wrist communicator. Suddenly, the royal fleet roared into the sky above the palace. Hundreds of Imperial soldiers stormed the halls, pushing back the invaders. The tide had turned. Kalis lunged forward, cutting down the enemy general with a precise strike. The royal guards rallied behind her, forcing the Zarvath forces to retreat. Within minutes, the battle was over. The Empire had survived. Victory and a new beginning. The next morning, the Imperial Palace stood strong despite the damage. Repairs had already begun. The people of the Empire cheered as news spread. The Emperor was safe, the traitor Xelos was captured, and the Zarvath invasion had failed. John stood beside Soraya and Kalis on the palace balcony, looking down at the crowds below. Kalis smirked. Not bad for an outsider. John chuckled. Not bad for a princess with knives. Soraya turned to John. The Empire owes you its life. John shrugged. Just doing my job. The Emperor stepped forward. No, John Carter, you did far more than that. He placed a medal of honor around John's neck. John raised an eyebrow. So does this mean I'm part of the Empire now? Soraya smiled. It means your family. John looked at his new friends, the princesses he had sworn to protect, and nodded. Guess I could stick around for a while. Above them, the stars shined bright, and the Empire stood strong once more.